Before we begin this video, I want to make a few things clear. I did not play the VR missions and the DLC missions of this game or its multiplayer, so those parts of the game will not be included in this video and won't affect the review. I apologize for the sound quality first of all, as I don't have the best microphone, and the gameplay I used in the video does not belong to me. The reason for that is, as of right now, I am a college student in a sophomore year studying away from where I normally live, which is where my PS4 is, which is the platform that I played the games that I will be talking about on. That makes it so that I do not have constant access to these games, and I cannot just gather footage from them whenever possible. I only have the opportunity to play them between semesters. That being said, I will play more of this game as soon as I get the chance to do so, but for this video, please keep in mind that I only got to play through the story once. Finally, I also want to add that this is the first time I try to make this type of content, so I apologize if it does not seem professional, well edited or well structured. Please do not hold back from delivering any kind of criticism, but please do so politely and constructively. With all of that being said, we can now start the video, but before we get into the review, I want to briefly talk about how I decided to try out Ace Combat 7, despite never playing a similar game in the past and having no interest in the series beforehand. During early 2019, it was my second semester in college, and in one of the courses, we had to form groups of 6 or 7, and each group had to then work on a project throughout the semester. I was initially with 2 of my friends, but then we found 3 other people for our group, 2 of which I didn't know yet. Throughout the semester, one of these 2 new people ended up becoming one of my closest friends because we noticed that our personalities and interests were so similar that neither of us even had any friends in the past that we had so much in common with. This led to us developing some sort of trust in each other's interests, at least most of them. We were both sure that if one of us liked something, then the other would also enjoy it. Of course, this didn't always come out to be true, but it was still mostly accurate. He tried a lot of games I recommended to him and enjoyed most of them. I also tried a few things that he recommended, such as JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and found it quite enjoyable, despite having watched only a couple of anime's first seasons beforehand and never getting invested in any of them. But one of the series that he loved the most was Ace Combat, which is obviously not the most popular franchise in the gaming community, and it is unfortunately even less recognized here in Turkey. He told me that he had never even met someone that knew about the series before he told them about it. That was not the case for me. I did know about the series, and by that I mean I only knew its name and what type of game it was. I never looked deeper into it because it just never seemed like the type of game that I would enjoy. That being said, I was sure that it was great for what it is, as me and my friend were confident in each other's judgment of good and bad games. However, I still wasn't convinced to give it a shot. You see, my friend knows a lot about aircraft, and he is very passionate about the subject, while I am the exact opposite. I know that fighter jets have wings, they are very fast, and they look cool. That's about all I know. I can be considered as an illiterate, uneducated, worthless pile of garbage when it comes to many real-life subjects, as I love to indulge myself in fantasy and sci-fi, especially when it comes to video games. As a result, I generally don't enjoy games that depict real-life events such as World War II. I like my cyborg ninjas and wacky woohoo pizzaman adventures, and since I thought that Ace Combat took place in the real world with real planes, which is true, they are real planes except they can carry 100 missiles and have lasers, I was convinced that I wouldn't enjoy it like my friend did, since I had no interest in any of this. However, during our many conversations, he revealed to me the magical world of Strangereal with its imaginary countries and fictional superweapons, its cheesy dialogue and anime twists. After hearing all that, I was like, go on? So after that, I became intrigued in the Ace Combat universe somewhat, but I was still reluctant about playing Ace Combat. I just couldn't shake off the feeling that it wasn't going to be fun for me, and I admit that this sort of thought process cannot be justified towards the type of game that I have never played before. I knew I was being biased, but I was reluctant to leave my comfort zone. However, something happened that I wasn't expecting at all. You see, I really like this webcomic called Homestuck, which may sound familiar to a lot of people out there, and just like Ace Combat, maybe even more so, Homestuck has an incredibly minuscule following here in Turkey. None of my friends had even heard about the thing before I told them about it, and after that, almost none of them were interested, and the ones that were ended up reading 20 pages before getting bored and moved on to something else. That was until late 2019, when my Ace Combat loving aircraft enthusiast friend started reading it and actually loved it. I finally realized what I had to while he was at the beginning of Act 4 and still enjoying it. I saw the parallel. I finally had a friend that loved the thing that I wanted so desperately for one of my friends to love, so that I can talk to them about it, make references and inside jokes. And yet, he still didn't have any friends that were into Ace Combat. Okay, time to do this. I bought Ace Combat 7 for the PS4 because my computer was a piece of shit, and when the fall semester of 2019 ended and I finally returned home, I played through the entire game, and during most of it, I was talking with him on Discord so that he could hear my reactions and thoughts of the game as I was playing through it. So, what do I think about this game finally that I gave it a shot despite my bias? Well everyone, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I was so reluctant to play this game because it is actually quite amazing. Let me start from the beginning. I was with my friend on Discord during my first session who told me to play with the expert controls. I was intimidated of course, but he told me that this was how the game was meant to be played, and after playing a couple of levels I understood why. It gives you more control over your aircraft and a better camera angle. And one of the things I love the most about this game is how you can control your aircraft so freely with just the right stick and the trigger buttons. The standard control scheme is easier to get used to, but it doesn't feel nearly as good when you finally get the hang of the expert controls. So after selecting the expert controls, I started the campaign on easy. Now one important thing that you should know about me is that I almost never play any game on the easiest difficulty. I may not be the most hardcore gamer out there, in fact I would say that I'm pretty average at most of them, but I still love a good challenge, so I play many games on harder difficulties if they are available, and even if I'm not comfortable in my abilities, I at least start on normal and not on easy. The reason I started playing Ace Combat 7 on easy is because that was the difficulty recommended for new players that have never played a similar type of game before. I also recall some of the flight sections of some games I played before like GTA 5, and remember how shitty I was at those. I don't know why, but controlling aircraft in those games were just something that I always managed poorly, and I didn't really have much experience with aircraft in video games outside of that. My friend also recommended that I start out on easy or at most normal, emphasizing the difficulty of the game, especially for newer players like myself. After beating the game, I can easily say that I'm glad I played on easy because this game is indeed really hard, especially for Nuggets, which is apparently what the AC fanbase calls newer players like me. I was originally going to call this video Ace Combat 7 review by a total newcomer, but then I saw the term Nugget and I absolutely fell in love with it. So, this game is challenging. Great, that's always an appreciated quality for a game in the gaming community, right? No problem there, but what else makes this game so great? After all, there are a lot of challenging games out there, so it's nothing special that it is hard. Let's move on. Well, hold on before you say that, because what makes this game so difficult is also one of the things that make it so special for me, and that is variety. Each mission has a different element or a unique combination of these different elements that make it challenging. The first few missions are more basic. Your objectives alternate between destroying a set of targeted enemies, defending your allies from the enemies, or reaching a score limit under a certain amount of time by causing as much destruction as possible. While doing these basic tasks, the enemies also become a bit more overwhelming by shooting more missiles, making sharper movements, or simply outnumbering you by a larger amount each time. These first few missions are pretty straightforward, yet still challenging enough to teach the player how to deal with enemies efficiently, read the map, and dodge the incoming missiles. These first missions also teach you the entire control scheme along with some specific maneuvers like high G-turn, where you brake and accelerate at the same time in order to make a sharp turn while sacrificing a significant amount of speed. Because of the sacrifice, the maneuver is risky to abuse since it can stall your plane. I hope I used the term correctly. This will happen when you slow down beyond a certain threshold, and you will be noticed by a stall warning while your aircraft starts to lose altitude rapidly with its radome directed towards the ground. Stalling can be extremely dangerous when you're flying low, as you can crash into the ground and instantly kill yourself. However, stalling can also be used to your own advantage in various ways. I occasionally stalled on purpose so that I can quickly aim towards the ground, but the real deal is performing what is called a PSM, a post-stall maneuver. These maneuvers can be done once you get your aircraft below a certain speed, and using the stall mechanics to your advantage, you can pull off some pretty insane moves. I didn't perform any PSMs myself, but after doing some research and watching some clips, I felt the same way as I felt after watching Devil May Cry Bloody Palace runs. In fact, the two series actually have a lot of things in common despite being so different. Both had drifted away from their original style to appeal to a wider audience in the early 2010s, and having their actual fanbase feel betrayed and alienated. However, they then redeemed themselves by creating a long-awaited magnificent sequel to the original series in 2019. Besides telling their own stories and introducing their own new mechanics, both of these sequels also brought back some of the most iconic parts of past titles. Ace Combat 7 brought back Stonehenge, a super weapon that served as a major plot point in Ace Combat 4, which was made all the way back in 2001. The MC5 brought back a lot of the demons that were only present in Devil May Cry 1, which was also made back in 2001.
We had our own
shitty game to appeal to the West.
So you see? Cut from the same cloth, you and I.
You don't know me.
I lost my whole
Fan base.
everything.
Another thing that they have in common is that they are challenging for newer players. I wouldn't say that either of them is Dark Souls levels of difficult, but both games are still difficult enough that a game journalist from Polygon will struggle to get past level 7 on easy and write the games off as elitist for hardcore players. My experience with AC7 was similar to the MC3. I died multiple times on many different missions during both of these games, but the parts where I struggled the most were right after the halfway point and the last mission of both of these games. In fact, I got to both final missions late at night after a long session of play, and I got so frustrated during those last missions that I quit playing and came back to them in the morning. Each of them took like 3 tries after that. I want to give credit to my friend here for his patience and understanding, because we were on Discord once again while I was playing AC7's final mission. See, I say some pretty mean things when I get mad without really thinking about it, and I might have harshly insulted one of his favorite games and its developers because I got frustrated in his final mission. Thankfully, he understood that I was just mad and didn't really mean any of it. I felt pretty good about myself after I beat the game. I could finally look up AC7 content without worrying about spoilers and learn about other people's experience about the game. Oh. You see, this is what I was talking about when I said I had the same feeling as I was watching the MC Bloody Palace videos. You beat these games and look back at your performance. You feel great because you finished a hard game, you're proud of how stylish or efficient you were during combat, and then you watch some other people's gameplay online and go, holy shit, how do they even do that? Wait, what? How? And then you feel like shit. So okay, we get it. The game has a control scheme that takes time to get used to, but it gives you a lot of freedom, along with some insane moves to perform, and has a very high skill ceiling. We even compared it to a game from a totally different genre. So are we now done with the difficulty? Can we move on to something different now? No! I talked about the aspects of this game's difficulty that were familiar to me, but what makes it different? Please recall what I said at the beginning of this topic. Each mission has a different element or a unique combination of these different elements that make it challenging. The first few missions are more basic. Your objectives alternate between destroying a set of targeted enemies, defending your allies from the enemies, or reaching a score limit under a certain amount of time by causing as much destruction as possible. Well, what about the following missions after them? Well, in one of them, you have to navigate through countless cliffs while looking out for lightning strikes that can stall your aircraft and mess with your UI. In another one, you have to find your targets before they escape inside a sandstorm that blocks their signals so that they can only appear on your radar for half a second occasionally. In another one, you have to stay under the clouds to avoid detection by the enemy radar so that a satellite that shoots giant fuck you missiles doesn't one-shot you. You must destroy these radar towers that are placed on the mountaintops above the clouds, but once you destroy them, you have to get under the clouds again as soon as possible so that you don't get hit by the fuck you missiles. But you don't always have enough time to do so if you just decide to come out of the clouds when you get close to a tower from any direction. You have to be patient and look for the best path that will let you take out the tower as quickly as possible without leaving the clouds for too long. But then after you take out all the towers, the satellite starts shooting down missiles manually, so you have to do the rest of the mission while staying away from these giant blast zones shown on the map. In another mission, you're given a device to call down airstrikes on the enemy silos because your weapons are not strong enough, I guess. You must then keep these markers aligned on your target for a few seconds as they get smaller and finally the area of the markers are hit. In another mission, you must get through this canyon and you cannot get above 600 meters, otherwise you will be detected. However, there are also spotlights all over looking for intruders. Not only do you have to navigate through the narrow canyon without crashing, you also have to avoid these spotlights. In another mission, you have to keep locked onto your targets for some time and get close to them so that you can identify whether they're an enemy or an ally before you attack, because your communications network is bamboozled. In another mission, you have to navigate through these narrow tunnels and chase this drone in a closed space where you have very little room to maneuver. And in another mission, you have to escort someone while these things called SAMs, surface to air missiles, try to shoot him down, but they are camouflaged so they don't show up on your radar, so you have to follow the trail of the missiles to find and destroy them. These missions are the reason this game exceeded my expectations. Here I am waiting for a bunch of shoot down the things on the map before time runs out missions, and the game gives me a stealth section through a narrow canyon. I love how Namco used their creativity to put a twist on some of the mechanics or the environment rather than just giving you bigger and tougher enemies to keep the levels difficult. None of these twists feel forced either, each of them serves the story and helps it progress. This game does mark your objectives on the map, but there's so much more to it. You have to listen to the briefings before the missions and the dialogue during the missions so that you know which targets you are supposed to focus on first or which ally to help at that moment. There are 3 weapons that you can choose from. The first one is your machine gun. It has a lot of bullets, infinite if you play on easy or normal, and it just shoots forward. Each bullet deals a small amount of damage, but it can be pretty effective against stationary or big and slow targets. Next is your standard missiles that you can use against any target. You first have to get closer than 2000 meters to your target so that you can lock onto them, but that is not all. You see, the missiles cannot take sharp turns, so when you approach a target from the side and launch a missile, it will most likely miss, as it will have to turn towards the enemy's direction of movement to catch them, and it will fail to do so. So when you want to shoot down an enemy, it is important that you move in the same or the opposite direction as them so that you have a higher chance of hitting them, because your missiles won't have to take sharp turns. Finally, you have your special weapons. Each aircraft can have one of 3 different special weapons. Many of these special weapons are either air-to-air or air-to-ground. They come in many different forms, but most of them are still missiles, just with longer lock-on distance and special properties that make them more reliable than your standard missiles for certain enemies and certain situations. This is why you should pay attention to the briefings before the missions, as they give you hints about what type of enemies you are going to be up against so that you can choose the appropriate special weapon. If most of your targets are going to be on the water, for example, it is probably a good idea to switch your special weapon to anti-ship missiles before beginning the mission. You should know the right time to use your special weapon, as it is important to land your shots with it. It does not have a lot of ammo, and if it is not an emergency, you should try to use it as efficiently as possible. For example, helicopters are slow enemies and they usually go down with a single shot from your standard missiles, so if you don't have to really take them out quickly from far away, then there's really no reason to waste any of your special weapon ammo on them. I know that you use the appropriate weapon on the appropriate target in every game, but it is much more crucial here, as one enemy bomber that is not destroyed in time can easily cause you to fail the mission. There are also some crazy multi-role special weapons indicated by yellow icons like pulse lasers and railguns that are aimed manually. I didn't experiment with these as much, but to me they didn't seem as useful as they are ridiculous. Except the pulse laser, that one is insane. You can keep firing it without cooldown, it has a lot of ammo and high damage. It's basically a ridiculously OP machine gun suitable for any target. One final thing that you have to be cautious of during each mission is the weather. Remember how I was talking about staying under the clouds for cover during one of the missions before? Well, clouds are present in almost every mission and they can affect combat massively. When you're inside a cloud, your vision is greatly obstructed and you can lock onto enemies from a maximum of 800 meters instead of 2000. That is a 60% decrease. On top of that, your missiles get drunk when they're inside the clouds and their homing ability is crippled. These are obviously big disadvantages, but you can also use them to your favor. You can use the clouds to escape enemy missiles yourself, as any missile will get drunk once they enter a cloud. However, you should also not stay in the clouds for too long, as your aircraft will start to ice up, and if it ices up to a certain point, it will stall. There can also be wind at certain places that will slightly push your plane left or right. This can especially be dangerous when you are in tight spaces. Now let's combine all that I've talked about thus far. For each mission you have to follow the briefing carefully so that you have an idea about what you're going to be doing and what the appropriate loadout should be. During the mission you have to keep an eye on the map and an ear on the radio so that you always have an idea of what you're supposed to do and how to avoid wasting any time or ammo. Some missions let you refill your ammo by having a return line set up so that you can replenish your health and ammo once you cross it, but most missions don't have one, despite having like 50 million targets that you have to shoot down and being 20 minutes long. But you should even be careful with your ammo during the missions that do have one, because going towards the line and then returning back do eat up some valuable time. You must be careful not to stay in the clouds too long and decide in which scenario the odds are on your side. Should you fire at a target inside the cloud or wait for them to come out? Are you in a hurry or can you wait? On top of all that, there is also a twist to every mission, like lightning strikes or spotlights that you should look out for, and you have to manage all of this while dodging countless enemy missiles, and believe me, I mean it when I say countless. The combination of all these different elements make each mission like a puzzle to solve, as you're not going to be successful on your first try most likely. It is then your job to figure out if something was wrong in the way you approached the mission or if you weren't as efficient as you were supposed to be. The game is never unfair to the player, so try not to get angry at it and instead focus on trying to solve the puzzle. And that concludes all I had to say about the game's difficulty. I know I kept it so long, but it was my second favorite thing about this game, and it was the one thing that exceeded all my expectations. Since I've already talked about the gameplay in the difficulty section, let's move on to the aircraft tree, where you can buy yourself new aircraft, parts and special weapons. There are about 25 to 30 planes you can buy without DLC, all with the in-game currency MRP, which stands for military result points. You get more or less MRP based on the points you earn throughout the mission and the difficulty. Each mission also has a base MRP reward, and you are rewarded with bonus MRP if you completed the mission for the first time. You can then spend this MRP for new aircraft, which consist of various different Russian, American and European planes. My friend's advice was that I should look at the 3 different planes at the end of the tree and choose one of them. You see, you have 4 branches to choose from at the beginning. You can pick the Japanese F-2A, the American F-14D, the European Mirage 2000 or the Russian MiG-29A. The Russian tree is entirely isolated from the others from beginning to end, while the others intersect and join one another at multiple points. So it is really important to at least decide whether you want the final Russian plane or one of the final American planes. You cannot decide halfway at the F-15E that you want an Su-57, you will have to go through the entire Russian tree for that. Other than that, there are multiple other factors that you should also consider when buying new aircraft. First of all aircraft are classified as either fighter, attacker or multi-role aircraft. Fighters excel at air-to-air combat, they appear blue on the aircraft tree and have greater speed and mobility compared to attackers and multi-roles. Attackers are slower and have the least mobility, restricting them from performing post-stall maneuvers. They excel at air-to-ground combat and appear red on the aircraft tree. There are only 2 attackers in the game, the American A-10C and the Russian Su-34. I believe this is because ground units don't usually cause so much trouble that you need to have an aircraft that only specializes in killing them. They are easy enough to get rid of using any basic or air-to-ground special weapon and don't usually cause as much trouble as enemy aircraft. Multi-roles are a mix between fighters and attackers. They are suitable against both ground and air. However, they are not as good against aircraft as fighters are or as good against ground units as attackers are. Their speed and mobility are also lower than fighters at their level, but better than attackers. They are just perfectly sufficient without being too crazy, and they appear purple on the aircraft tree. You can see the stats of each plane as well as their available special weapons when you hover over them. The ones available to them usually correlate with their role. For instance, the Russian attacker Su-34 has 2 air-to-ground special weapons and only 1 air-to-air special weapon available. And the American attacker A-10C only has air-to-ground special weapons. Fighters, on the other hand, mostly have at least 2 air-to-air special weapons to choose from. Finally, multi-roles always have at least 1 air-to-air and 1 air-to-ground special weapon, as you might guess. Each aircraft you buy comes equipped with one of its 3 special weapons, and you have to buy the 2 others if you want to use them, so consider that before shopping for planes as well. For each aircraft, the special weapon on the left is the free one and the other 2 need to be purchased before they can be used. You can hover over them to see what they do as well. Finally, the aircraft tree features countless aircraft parts. Some are optional, but there's usually at least 1 part that you have to get before you can move on to the next plane. Most of the times there's 2 or 3 in fact. So almost all of these upgrades are mandatory to get if you want to buy all the aircraft. This is pretty much the only part that bugs me about the aircraft tree. I think it would be better if you could directly buy the next aircraft and the upgrades in between were optional. I never used some of the upgrades that the game made me buy, and it ended up making me feel like I just wasted a bunch of my MRP for nothing. But what about the ones that you do want to use? You can equip the parts that you bought just before you start a mission. There's a maximum of 8 parts that you can put on your aircraft, and also each section of your aircraft has a weight capacity. Every part counts for one of the 8 slots and has a certain weight that it will add to one of the sections of your aircraft: arms, body or miscellaneous. Personally, I never had any problems with the weight limit, and 8 slots are honestly more than enough for some pretty nice and significant upgrades to your aircraft. After your first playthrough, you will have most likely collected enough MRP to complete just a single branch, especially if you're a nugget like me who barely made it through easy. But there are still so many other aircraft parts and special weapons that you probably didn't have a chance to try out that each have their own perks and specialties. There are countless different loadouts to experiment with, and since every mission is so vastly different, you can multiply the amount of those loadouts with the number of missions and you got insane replayability, not even taking the different difficulty levels to account or multiplayer. However, my favorite thing about the Aircraft 3 is the soundtracks that play while you're shopping based on which airbase hangar you're currently in. There are 3 of these hangars, but my favorite is the funky beat that plays in the first hangar during the first 4 missions. And while we're at it, do you guys remember what I said at the end of my ramblings about the difficulty? And that concludes all I had to say about the game's difficulty. I know I kept it so long, but it was my second favorite thing about this game. Yeah, second favorite. Can you guess what my favorite thing is? Well, it is... I cannot even think of words to describe the beauty that is this game's soundtrack. It is easily one of the best that I've ever heard. It uses a lot of the same leitmotifs, so there are similarities between many of the tracks, but that doesn't make any of them any less amazing. In fact, it makes you even more happy when you hear that God-sent angelic chorus and remember hearing them before all the way back in a different mission. I was particularly at the brink of creaming my pants during the 19th mission. We were once again on Discord with my friend and he was giggling with joy while listening to my reactions, which were just loud orgasmic noises because I wasn't even able to produce sentences at those moments. Now I understand why he was so mad that Ace Combat 7 was not one of the nominees for Best Score in the Game Awards 2019, which is insulting. Listen, I don't know the soundtracks of any of these games here except Devil May Cry 5, and I love that game's soundtrack. I listen to Devil Trigger like 5 times every day, it's like a ritual for me at this point. But I'm willing to admit that even that can't compete with Daredevil, which gives me chills down my spine every time I hear it, even when I'm casually listening to it on YouTube. I may not know the soundtracks of the 4 other games here, but if people thought that DMC5 could compete with them, I don't see any reason why Ace Combat 7 wouldn't be able to. And the game wasn't even mentioned in any of the other categories either, fuck you guys. This game deserves better. This is exactly why I decided to make my first review about this game, because it is one of the most underappreciated pieces of media I've ever seen. It is heartbreaking to see such a good game go under everyone's radar, and I believe it is due to the same reason why I was so reluctant to play this game. People think that it is solely for aircraft nerds, and aircraft nerds write it off for being an arcade flight shooter instead of a flight simulator. You don't need to know shit about aircraft to enjoy this game. You don't have to be interested in that, and if you are, that's even better. You can enjoy it for what it is, then return to your boring realistic simulator. It is a game that can be enjoyed by anyone, and it does not expect you to know much about the previous games either. There are appearances of past characters here and there along with callbacks to some events from the past games, but you are given enough information about them during briefings and dialogue so you won't feel lost. The story is mostly self-contained and you won't have much problem following it if you are paying attention to the cutscenes and the dialogue. So, while we're at it, let's finally talk about the story. Hi, this is me 1 month after I recorded the previous parts. A lot of stuff happened during this month, a lot of schoolwork that I have to do just stacked up, and I had to stop working on this video, and then the coronavirus spread everywhere, putting us all in quarantine. I had to travel back home, and now I'm going to have online courses starting next week, which is probably going to be just a total shit show. Everything is just a mess, honestly, but at least I can keep working on most of the things that I normally work on my computer. Most of that is still going to be schoolwork for a while, unfortunately, so it may be quite a while until my next video, but for now, I want to wrap this video up. Before I move on to the story, I want to say a few things about this video. It didn't really end up as I dreamed of, but then again, what project does, right? There are still a lot of things I don't know, and I'm just learning as I make new content. I may have to switch to a different editing software because I sometimes have issues with this one. Maybe I can alternate between multiple different softwares for my projects in the future, I'm not sure yet. But it's definitely going to be something that I'll have to look into, which is another reason it might take a while before the next video. I also said previously on the video that I'm willing to admit that Devil Trigger can't compete with Daredevil, and I want to make a correction about that. I guess I was just so hyped about AC7 as I was recording that because I don't really like one of these tracks more than the other. One is just an epic goosebumps galore while the other is a lit beat that gets me in the mood, and I don't have a definitive preference between them. All the other things I said during that part is still true though, which essentially just boils down to this.
I may not know the soundtracks of the 4 other games here, but if people thought that DMC5 could compete with them, I don't see any reason why Ace Combat 7 wouldn't be able to. And the game wasn't even mentioned in any of the other categories either, fuck you guys.
I probably shouldn't have talked about Devil May Cry so much throughout the video. A few references would be fine, but I think talking so much about the piece of media other than the one being reviewed just ended up making this video a lot more unprofessional than it already is, and I'll try to get rid of this behavior for my future projects. So with all of that out of the way, let's wrap this up. I hate to end this video on a bitter note, but honestly, I find the story to be the weakest thing about this game, and it is not because it's bad. There are some very intense moments that will keep your eyes locked on the screen during this whole sequence, along with some genuinely heartwarming dialogue. The cast is great, some of them are funny, entertaining goofballs, and some of them are very interesting, intriguing enigmas. The story also has some very nice and positive messages. It is actually focused on peace despite being mostly about war. However, it is also much more flawed in my opinion compared to every other aspect of the game that I talked about. It falls kind of short when everything else is so great. I would give the story like a 7 out of 10, and I think everything about the rest of the game is either a perfect 10 or a 9. For now, I'm going to try to give you a general idea of how the story goes without spoiling anything as best as I can, then I will get into the spoiler territory. I will give a warning beforehand so you don't have to worry about that. The story follows different characters at different cutscenes, and what you're doing has loosely anything to do with them for the most part. That is until the very end, when all the different characters end up together and work towards the same goal. They also find a way to communicate with your squadron and you end up helping them. It is commendable that the game manages to tie in all these storylines so neatly towards the end, but the problem with that is it didn't really give me much time to get invested in its narrative. There are 20 missions, but there isn't a cutscene after every single one of them. It's more like one cutscene every 2 missions, and when you're following different characters with these cutscenes one at a time, none of them really gets much screen time, and it kind of hinders the pacing. Nothing happens in any of these cutscenes other than long and repetitive inner monologues for like half of the game, and then all kinds of shit is happening way too fast during the second half. But like I said before, your character follows a different story than the cutscenes until the few missions at the very end, so what about that story? Well, that kind of suffers the same problem as well. You work with 3 different squadrons throughout the game. You do the first 4 missions as part of the Mage Squadron, the following 6 missions after that as part of the Spare Squadron, and the remaining ones as part of the Strider Squadron. Each of these parts feature an entirely different cast except one character that persists for more than 10 missions. This results in the same problem. You don't really have enough time to warm up to these characters enough that you would maybe shed a tear if any of them died, which is quite a shame because a lot of these characters are also quite likable. There is also the dialogue, which is fine for the most part, but it is way too melodramatic at certain times, especially during the cutscenes. Don't get me wrong, I love cheesy dialogue, but some lines even made me roll my eyes. I'm not an expert in writing, but I feel like I could enjoy and care more about the story if there were fewer characters, or if the game was a bit longer, or if you didn't change squadrons twice. I don't even remember any members of the Mage Squadron and only remember half of Spare. There are just too many characters for 20 missions. It's like making Homestuck 500 pages. You'll understand what I'm talking about if you read it. It just isn't long enough for 3 storylines and this many characters. These issues led to an otherwise great story end up as one of the least memorable things about the game for me, unfortunately. Now I want to exemplify this problem by entering the spoiler territory. But other than that, the review is over. If you don't want spoilers, you can quit watching now, or you can skip to the last 10 seconds if you want to hear for one last time that Ace Combat 7 is great and that you should play it. First of all, during, was it the 3rd mission? I don't know. Brownie's dead, whatever mission that was. Brownie was screaming in panic as I was rushing to her, repeating, "Oh no, please don't die, Brownie," and as you can guess, I was in Discord with my friend once again. I think he got the impression that I was worried about Brownie, but I was actually worried that it was going to fail the mission. After her death, all I felt was, oh, it was supposed to happen, thank God. I understand that you think a character screaming for their life in panic before dying will make it more heart-crushing than Koei, and it certainly does. But you also have to make it a character that I've known for more than 2 missions. Not only did these deaths not mean much to me, I also felt that they were all kind of pointless. I mean, I didn't feel shit when Brownie died, and I don't know how the rest of the squadron were affected even, because I ended up in a different one 2 missions later. I guess Fullband and Wiseman's deaths were semi-impactful for Count's character development, but once again I didn't really care all that much. I felt sad for like 10 seconds after Wiseman died, I think, and that's about it. And I say semi-impactful for Count's character, as all they added to it was grr, Bandog, you bastard, you made me kill my friend for 2 missions, and grr, Mr. X, I hate you, you killed Wiseman also for like 2 missions. They didn't really affect much of his character besides those at all, or at least I didn't see any noticeable changes. He didn't even get to avenge his squad leader because Air Jesus Trigger over here has to do everything. I mean, I understand that I have to be the one to fight against the boss, I'm the protagonist, but you could maybe let Count get like 1 hit in instead of making him watch while I avenge his squad leader. Don't you think it would redeem his character a little since everyone seems to hate him? No, just me? Okay. I mean, he accepts Trigger's superiority and comes into terms with not being number 1 more and more throughout the missions. I guess you can count that as character development, badumtus. But I feel like that would happen anyway, regardless of whoever died around him except Trigger. And finally there's Tabloid. Listen, I'm in the middle of an epic warfare against the Arsenal bird here as Daredevil is blasting full power in the background. You think I give a shit that Tabloid got smashed by some wreck? He had like 30 lines in the entire game. Listen, I understand that not every death has to be impactful and not every death has to serve a purpose in the story, but it feels like if any, no, all of these characters stayed alive, nothing would change about the story at all. I also understand that it may be the point, because in war you have to carry on with the mission as if nothing happened. Even if it was someone that you cared about, you have to accept it as just another casualty and move on with your duty. But they weren't people that I cared about! Finally, there are some specific parts of the dialogue that bothered me. You remember how I said that the inner monologues were long and repetitive? Like, we get it, Avril, this place sucks, you can keep the descriptions shorter. Yes, I do understand that Mihai likes the sky and doesn't care about the ground, you don't have to repeat it in every cutscene! So yeah, that's my Ace Combat 7 review, you should play it, it has a good story and everything else is amazing. I give it an SU57 out of 10. Also, Lancaster is the best character, best girl and best waifu in the history of video games.
Hand me that sandwich.